Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Tsunami fears remain across the Pacific after a Russian earthquake as waves hit the west coast of the United States. Netanyahu blasts the UK for planning to recognise a Palestinian state if Israel don't take steps to end the war in Gaza. And family and fans of Ozzy Osbourne line the streets of Birmingham as his coffin passes through the city centre for a final farewell. One of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded struck Russia's Far East earlier today, sending tsunami waves across the Pacific. Nearly 2 million people were urged to evacuate coastal parts of Japan, while people in Hawaii were told to get to high ground. Patrick Falk reports.
In Japan, waves crashed into the Hokkaido coastline following the magnitude 8.8 quake. The tremor that struck off Kamchatka in Russia's Far East is reportedly among the strongest 10 quakes ever recorded. It prompted a quick response from the Japanese government.
For citizens in the area included in the tsunami warning, please evacuate to a safe place immediately, such as designated evacuation buildings and hills. We are receiving reports and currently monitoring for any details of damage or casualties.
Here, people could be seen taking shelter on top of a fire department in Mukawa town in northern Japan. The developments today have triggered memories of the 2011 magnitude 9 quake which tore through the Fukushima nuclear power plant and caused a radioactive disaster.
My workplace is near the sea, so I received the alert here, and my co-workers told me to go home because my children are still small and waiting for me at home, so I headed over.
Elsewhere in Hawaii, the earthquake kept people on high alert. At a resort in Waikiki, hotel guests gathered on balconies, scanning the horizon as the sun set over the ocean. Waves of up to 1.7 meters impacted the islands before the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center reduced its warning level, saying no major tsunami was expected.
The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center has downgraded the forecast from a tsunami warning to a tsunami advisory. The PTWC continues to monitor for more data to update its forecast and for an all clear that they may issue later on. A tsunami advisory means that the potential for strong currents or dangerous waves are expected or occurring for those in or near the water. There may be flooding of beach or harbor areas. Those who have evacuated may safely return home based on county assessments and directives.
The threat still isn't over. Authorities in French Polynesia are urging people to remain cautious. Waves are expected to hit some islands in the coming hours. Meanwhile, aftershocks at the quake epicenter are ongoing, and seismologists say their intensity could remain fairly high for now. Patrick Falk, Arabiya.
Let's get into this further with Professor James Jackson from the Department of Earth Scientists at the University of Cambridge. Professor Jackson, pleasure to have you on the show. What was it about this particular earthquake that prompted tsunami warnings?
An earthquake happens when rocks break and slide past each other on surfaces, which we call faults. And if those surfaces are underneath the sea, then it moves the seabed. And if you lift the seabed up a few meters, the water has to get out of the way. So it gets lifted up also, and then it collapses. And that's what makes a tsunami. So if the earthquake's on land, this won't happen. But this happens when the earthquake's offshore under the ocean, as it was in Japan in 2011, for example.
There are concerns that aftershocks can be as strong as the quake itself. Tsunami warnings have actually since been downgraded today. Is this putting millions of people in danger?
No, I don't think so. Not from the tsunami anyway. It's most unlikely that an aftershock would make a tsunami as big as the first one in this case. So aftershocks locally can be damaging because of the ground shaking. So if there are buildings which have been damaged but haven't quite collapsed, in the epicentral region, then aftershocks can do a lot of extra damage, yes, certainly. But they're not likely to make a big tsunami which crosses the ocean.
Professor, as earthquakes go, this was an absolute monster. But why did such a powerful earthquake actually pass so quietly? You know, we heard Patrick Fock there talking earlier about the 2011 tsunami that happened in Japan, but this one didn't seem to have that massive impact we've seen before.
Well, it was smaller. It's still a very big earthquake. But where it happened on Kamchatka is not very populated, and most of the buildings you see in the photographs are fairly lightly constructed. They're not sort of high-rise skyscrapers or anything. And if they're lightly constructed buildings, they should stay up. These days, engineers and architects know how to build buildings which will stay up if they're fairly lightly built. But the big danger from these things is when they hit places where the building quality is very, very bad.
So what happens next, and how can people be protected and stay safe?
Well, if you live nearby, the only thing you can do is to make sure your buildings are okay. So reinforce them or build good buildings in the first place. And as far as the tsunami is concerned, it's education which matters. Everybody in Japan, for example, knows that immediately you feel a big earthquake on the shoreline, you move inland and uphill. And that's the message which every school child knows in places like Japan, New Zealand, California, Chile. That's taught in schools. And you always have time. Even if you're really nearby, like in Japan or Kamchatka, you have about 20 minutes from when the earthquake happens before the tsunami will hit you. If you're further away, like in Hawaii, you had 8 hours warning. So there's plenty of time to get out of the way of the tsunami in those places.
And Professor, just a question that I wanted to put to you. Is new technology playing a key role when it comes to detecting natural disasters and foreseeing tsunamis and earthquakes? And is this helping to keep people safer?
Yes, certainly. What we can do now, when there is an earthquake, we can work out very quickly, in a matter of seconds, where it is, what sort of earthquake it was, how much the earth moved, where it moved. And from that, you can actually make a very good forecast of any tsunami that will happen afterwards. So from a tsunami point of view, yes, it's got much safer, I would say. What we cannot do is predict the time of the earthquake itself. We do know that where there have been earthquakes in the past, you will have them again. And indeed, there was a very big earthquake in Kamchatka in the 1950s, similar sort of size. So it's not a surprise that it happens there, but we can't predict precisely when it will happen.
Thank you so much for talking to me, Professor James Jackson from the Department of Earth Sciences at the University of Cambridge Bullard Laboratories. Fascinating to have your insights. Appreciate your time. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the UK's plans to recognise a Palestinian state rewards Hamas. On Tuesday, Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer said his country would take this step at the UN meeting in September if Israel failed to agree to a ceasefire. Around 140 countries have now been formally backed plans for a two-state solution, including France, who made a similar announcement this week. We can now speak to Dr. Saidam Sabri, Fatah's Deputy Secretary General. An absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Doctor. So the UK will recognise a Palestinian statehood in September unless Israel agrees to a Gaza ceasefire. Do you support the UK's decision to do this?
Well, it's good to be with you indeed. As a Palestinian, I certainly welcome this step. It's a huge step forward. It's a way of expressing also pity that the Palestinians have been over 100 years, over a century, awaiting such a move. Yet the conditionality that is associated with such promise of Starmer, this time not Balfour, is what worries me. Why would ever the Palestinian independence and self-integrity be associated with any conditions whatsoever? So what happens if Israel allows the influx of sacks of flour into Gaza or stop the war, as it were, would that indicate that Britain can then withdraw such a promise? I find that quite worrying in a way, but that does not in any way undermine the fact that this is a huge step forward and it is commendable, but yet to be associated with the result when September comes.
So I just wanted to ask you exactly what you find worrying about Keir Starmer and the UK Labour Party actually recognising a Palestinian state. Do you think that they have thought ahead of how Gaza will be rebuilt? What's your concerns?
Well, obviously, as a Palestinian, my concern would be the immediate cessation of hostilities, saving Palestinian blood, opening the crossings for aid to come through, the reconstruction of Gaza, the contiguity of Palestinian geography connecting the West Bank and Gaza, and the withdrawal of the Israeli army, and also the resumption of the work of the Palestinian Authority on the geography of the Gaza Strip. These are the things that worry me. Yet, when Starmer made his promise and followed by his foreign secretary, certainly associated some conditions with such a promise, saying, if Israel does that, then we may not recognize Palestine. If you look at the wording of the promise, there were some sort of conditionality that was associated with it in a way that makes it a bit uncertain, unclear. And I fear most that by September, he will have other ideas. He is Starmer, having other ideas. Certainly, that step came along because of the pressure that he is enduring within his party, and also the pressure of the international community. And certainly, the pain and pictures coming out of Gaza are moving everyone. So quite worrying, as it were, and I hope that Britain will stand by its promise to recognize Palestine.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Britain's decision rewards Hamas. Is Keir Starmer strengthening the hands of the terrorists as the hostages are still under Hamas control?
Well, imagine if ever the Palestinian liberty will be associated with what Netanyahu says. Netanyahu is a murderer, he's a criminal, he should stand before international tribunal. He is not the one to issue any sort of ultimatums, nor is he the one to give any credits to any decision that's been taken. Britain, being a sovereign country, has the liberty to make such a promise. And if anything, he will certainly, being who he is, will work towards undermining such a promise by, saying that this is rewarding Hamas. If anything, this is rewarding the Palestinian people, the very people that have been suffering for endless years, 76 years of Israeli occupation. Hasn't this gone way too long, rather, for the Palestinians to preserve their integrity, their independence, and their self-determination? I think Netanyahu will continue to throw accusations here and there, so to undermine such a promise and maybe other promises to come our way.
Doctor, Hamas have said they will agree to a deal if Israeli forces are forced to leave the Gaza Strip. Is this a reasonable request from them? And would Fatah support this idea too?
Well, as you know, I don't speak for Hamas, but as a Palestinian and as a Fatah affiliate, I would say certainly any preservation of Palestinian blood, any stoppage to this madness that exists in Gaza is most welcome. People are starving. People are even deprived of basic water and needs, human needs that are needed desperately. So anything that helps my people is certainly welcome. Yet the conditions and the preconditions and the conditions that have been set are extremely unclear. Israel says one thing, Hamas says something else. But what we collectively say as Palestinians, yes to the LD4, yes to Israeli full withdrawal from the geography of Gaza, yes to the contiguity of the West Bank and Gaza, and Palestinian governance through the Palestinian Authority is certainly the way forward, besides opening the crossings and allowing aid, and most importantly, allowing the reconstruction of Gaza, which is so desperately needed since, satellite imaging is showing that there's nothing left whatsoever.
Fatah and the party's leader, Mahmoud Abbas, are calling for Palestinian unity. What does the future political landscape look like? Will Fatah work with Hamas to rebuild the country if a ceasefire deal is reached?
Well, Mahmoud Abbas is the head and the leader of Fatah, as you quite rightly put it. And he is the one who has been advocating this unity to be achieved. Yet I, for one, definitely believe that the Palestinian political landscape will not be saved unless Palestinian unity is restored. Yet Hamas has to recognize the fact that there have been laws that have been passed in several countries that ban Hamas being party to any Palestinian future political scene. So Hamas has to retitle itself, Hamas has to revisit its doctrine, and Hamas has to agree to the principles that have been long agreed with the PLO and Fatah by putting this, these principles on paper, signing the paper and sending it our way, so that we can show the international community that A, we are united, and B, we are serious about the way forward, which should be aligned with UN resolutions, with the international law, and certainly with the doctrine of the PLO as well.
Dr. Zidan Sabri, Fatah's Deputy Secretary General, a pleasure to have you back on the show. Thank you. I'm now joined in the studio by Faisal Abbas, the Chief Editor of Arab News. An absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming into the studio. So the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has really heavily criticised the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, for saying that they are willing to recognise a Palestinian state if a ceasefire deal isn't achieved in September. Do you agree with the notion of Benjamin Netanyahu that he is rewarding Hamas, the British Prime Minister?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be with you, Leigh-Ann, and thank you for that very important question. And I take this opportunity to remind your viewers and everybody watching of a very important fact. It is very audacious of Benjamin Netanyahu to make such statements about the Right Honourable Keir Starmer, given that Hamas is a designated terrorist organization in Israel. It's a terrorist organization in many countries around the world, including many Arab countries. Many Arabs dislike Hamas and are completely opposed to it. And this is what the part that I wanted to refer to. Hamas's biggest enabler for the past 16 years has been Benjamin Netanyahu. And those are not my words. Those are the words of the senior political correspondent of the Times of Israel, Tal Schneider, who wrote an article on the 8th of October, a day after the atrocious terror attacks on Israel, saying for years Netanyahu propped up Hamas and now it has blown up in our face. And the argument here, if I may add, is that it was strategy deployed by the consecutive Israeli governments that Benjamin Netanyahu led to discredit the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, where Hamas does not exist, and empower Hamas in Gaza for several reasons, creating divisions between the Palestinians so that Israel can always say, we don't have a partner to negotiate with, Palestinians can get along, giving the Palestinian resistance an unacceptable face worldwide and empowering that face, and continuously annexing land and continuing with the violations that Israeli are clearly continuing to do till this day.
So obviously, I just want to give the side of what Israel would say back to you, and they would say back that they're protecting their sovereignty of their country. You know, they're on the border with Palestine, and Hamas are threatening Israel. And Lebanon, we have Hezbollah. Of course, we also have the Houthis in Yemen. So that would be the argument of Israel, that they're protecting themselves. And we do know that because I have spoken to the IDF. But really, you know, hostages are still in captivity and Hamas are still running Gaza. So my big question to you is, where does this all end? What happens next? And do you think that it's likely that we'll see a ceasefire deal now that the UK is putting pressure, and France, to say we're going to recognise a Palestinian state if these ceasefire agreements are not actually reached or agreed upon?
No, again, thank you for that question, but allow me to flip the argument there. It's not like Israel suddenly woke up and realized Hamas is a monster. They knew that from day one when they decided, when Benjamin Netanyahu's consecutive government over 16 years decided to go in bed with Hamas, to deliver money to them on monthly basis, to empower them, to make them look more credible in front of the Palestinians, to create divisions between them and the Palestinian Authority so that there is no unified Palestinian front. They knew that all along, and they knew exactly who they were getting into bed with. So I am surprised that they are surprised with the outcome that happened on 7th October. What were you expecting? We all know Hamas's agenda and Hamas's ideology. Now, having said that, what Israel is doing in the West Bank in terms of annexation and what it's doing in Gaza in terms of the genocide, in terms of using food and water and power as a weapon is a clear violation of international law, and it needs to stop. Now, whether or not the Israeli government responds to the thinly veiled threats by Keir Starmer and others, whether that impacts them, I don't know. But the fact is, this has dragged on for too long, and the world now needs to act unilaterally, because waiting for Israel to do the right thing, especially with this right-wing government, is next to impossible. So the only solution now is for the world to follow in the footsteps of France and do the right, honorable thing.
So we talk about this and we talk about pressure on Israel, and that's what we have to do now, and people to follow in the footsteps of France and the UK in recognising a Palestinian state if it gets to that situation in September. But a lot of people are saying it's the US that needs to pressure Israel. Is this the only country that can really make a difference? And is the West doing enough for the Palestinian people and the people in Gaza? Because we know people are starving to death, they're malnourished, there's not enough aid going in. The UN have said this, the World Food Programme. You know, where is the end to this? Is this down to Donald Trump in the US to have a serious conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu?
So allow me to unpack that. There's two questions regarding the West and regarding Trump and the United States. Regarding the West, I would say too little, too late, but at the same time, better late than never. I don't want to be negative about this. What has happened over the past few days is extremely important. France's position, Britain's position, although I would have liked them to go all in and recognize Palestine and correct.
That's just what the Fatah Secretary General was saying to me, saying they're disappointed they haven't gone all in, and he hopes they don't roll back when September comes around because of pressure from Israel.
No, absolutely. But given the internal pressure within the UK as well, and this is a golden opportunity for the United Kingdom to correct a historical wrong with the Balfour Declaration. I think they're on the they're taking the right steps on the right way, and for that they should be applauded. This is why I said, on one hand, better late than never, and on the other hand, too little, too late. Of course, there are countries that have been at the forefront of this, such as Spain and Ireland, and we thank them for their honorable position with standing with what's right. At the end of the day, nobody wants blood on their hand, and nobody will accept a genocide. Nobody will accept displacement or people dying out of hunger in Gaza. Now, with regards to the United States, yes, the United States has incredible leverage over Israel. I don't think Biden could have pulled it, but if there is one man in the world today that has the leverage and the ability to convince anybody, by the way, he is a master salesperson. I'm talking
master
about
negotiator.
Master negotiating. Many might not agree, but I think he genuinely wants peace. He wants that legacy, and he doesn't want it happening on his watch. Now, what rabbits can he pull out of the hat? What tricks can he do? I don't know. However, what is definitely certain that if there is one man in the world that has the ability to convince Netanyahu to do the right thing. And the country that has leverage is the United States. We've seen, despite all the criticisms, and I'm very aware of them, but we've seen Trump negotiate between Pakistan and India successfully, recently between Cambodia and Thailand successfully, and he's putting a lot of his political weight and leverage in trying to resolve this conflict.
And I guess if we also think about it, it's Israel and Iran who also helped negotiate that ceasefire there. But thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you and coming in. That was a fascinating insights. Thank you so much. Faisal Abbas, the chief editor of Arab News. Once again, have a great evening. Thank you. The Trump administration have asked two judges to release the testimonies of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell as pressure mounts on the US president. During his recent trip to Scotland, Trump continued to be questioned on his relationship with the late financier who died in jail back in 2019. The US president has faced scrutiny over making the federal investigation documents public. For more on this, I'm joined from Washington by our correspondent, Sarah Firth. Sarah, a pleasure to have you on the show. So the controversy surrounding the Epstein and Maxwell investigation just doesn't go away. It's continuing, and there have been some new developments overnight. What does the Justice Department's new filing actually change in all of this?
Yes, Leigh-Ann, so you've had overnight this renewed push from the Trump administration for the federal courts to unseal this grand jury testimony from Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's cases. Now, they filed the motion with two Manhattan judges, and they've argued that the abundant public interest in these cases, that is a justification, they feel, for these, which are usually secret transcripts, to be made public. Now, they had previously filed for this to be unsealed, for this testimony to be unsealed. One judge in Florida for previous cases had already rejected that bid. And you've had the courts come back to the Department of Justice in this instance. They had asked for a stronger legal justification. And now we've seen the Department of Justice put this justification forward. Will it be enough? That's a question that's being asked here. Leigh-Ann, look, even if those transcripts were to be released, and it would be highly unusual, it's not clear that there would actually be any new information in that, and it certainly wouldn't be all the information that we know that the government currently does have in its hands. So still really big questions remaining here.
Yes, exactly. Will it be enough to please everyone? President Trump says he wants transparency. So why is this push to unseal grand jury transcripts actually so contentious over in the US?
Well, look, the thing with the grand jury testimony is that it is supposed to be secret, full stop. And the reasoning for that, those legal protections, are so that you have witnesses in these sensitive cases that are able to come forward, that you have victims who feel safe with coming forward with their testimony as well. So there is a lot for the courts to weigh in this instance, and it's not clear that the Department of Justice's argument about the public interest will be enough to convince the court of the reasoning to make those transcripts public. Look, there's also a lot of criticism here in Washington as well of the fact that it's seen as a bit of an exercise, if you like, in trying to rebuild public trust, right? We know the Department of Justice have a lot of information in their hands. They've tried to say that there is no relevant information with regards to a client list or the like, that we've seen those allegations that Jeffrey Epstein had that client list. Then you had that huge public backlash. And so this is really the Department of Justice, trying to find a way to get further information out to the public, to certainly be seen to be be doing something. But the criticism is, well, you already have this, trove of information, of videos, testimonies. Why isn't that being made public? And that is where all the controversy just keeps building, and the story not going away despite the White House's efforts to try and get that case closed.
Yes, absolutely. And Trump says Epstein stole young women from his spa. He made those comments on Air Force One. How are those remarks being received?
Well, there were a lot of raised eyebrows, Leigh-Ann, here in Washington at those remarks. He made them on Air Force One, and it came on the back of the day before when he'd spoken about this anecdote of Jeffrey Epstein stealing people from his spa at Mar-a-Lago. He'd said that that was one of the reasons he put forward primarily for why President Trump and Jeffrey Epstein fell out. He said he'd warned Jeffrey Epstein about stealing people from the spa, and then it happened again, and he told him, get out. And apparently that was the cause of the major rift between the two. So you had him clarifying on board Air Force One when he was asked, was Virginia Giuffre, a very, very well-known victim of Jeffrey Epstein, was she one of the people who Jeffrey Epstein allegedly stole from the spa? And he said that he thought possibly that she was. Now, Virginia Giuffre was just 16 years old when she was recruited by Epstein. We know her story, and very sadly, she died by suicide earlier this year. A very, very high-profile case. And so, Leigh-Ann, what this has done, it's two things. It's raised massive questions here about President Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and the timeline, right? The proximity that President Trump, then Donald Trump, of course, had to Jeffrey Epstein in this timeline when the abuse was taking place. And there's a further criticism too, and that is the use of this language that he used, the idea of Jeffrey Epstein stealing people from him. You've had trauma experts coming out and saying, look, this turns what is a very deeply disturbing, traumatic survivor narrative of abuse into something that's a possession metaphor. And so that language hasn't landed very well here in DC. A lot of people stunned, frankly, that President Trump would make these candid remarks, because it's shone more of a spotlight on his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein at a time when President Trump and the White House are desperate for attention to be moved away from that relationship.
And there's been a lot of talk of clemency for Ghislaine Maxwell. Could Trump actually pardon her?
Legally, Leigh-Ann, yes, he could. Politically, if you talk to people here in DC, it's certainly a very, very sensitive subject. Look, you have such outcry, not just from Democrats and from the wider American public, but from President Trump's own base as well. There was an Ipsos Reuters poll that said 69% of Americans and 62% of those Americans, Republicans, feel that the government is hiding something here when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein's client list. Now, we know that the House Oversight Committee, they have subpoenaed Ghislaine Maxwell. She's currently serving 20 years in prison for sex trafficking. They have subpoenaed her to appear before Congress to answer questions. Now, her lawyers have put forward a response to that. They say Maxwell originally wanted to plead the Fifth, but she's decided she might cooperate and answer questions only if, and she's given a list of conditions that have been leaked to the media, among them, only if she gets immunity. The idea, even the idea of Ghislaine Maxwell getting immunity, a convicted sex trafficking offender, has caused outrage, further outrage on top of the anger that's already prevalent amongst President Trump's own base. So yes, while it is legally possible, it is very unlikely, or it would be a very precarious situation for President Trump to tread into that territory. He's already come out and said, when asked about it, about this request from Ghislaine Maxwell, no one's approached him about it. That's not a no. So it does seem, as of right now, that everything is still on the table. The House Oversight Committee has already come back and said they're going to be responding to Maxwell's list of demands, but they will not, they say, consider immunity. So, Leigh-Ann, as you said at the start of this, this controversy just really not dying down right now.
Sarah Firth in Washington, thank you so much for joining us. Now, fans of Ozzy Osbourne have lined the streets of Birmingham today to pay respect to the rock and roll frontman and reality TV star who did die last week. The funeral took place in the singer's hometown, with his coffin travelling through the city centre before the service. Osbourne had played to crowds at Villa Park for the final Black Sabbath gig just 2 weeks before his death. Let's get the latest with a showbiz reporter at the Daily Mail, Stephanie Tetchy. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. So the funeral was really a final homecoming for Ozzy Osbourne in Birmingham following his concert with Black Sabbath at the beginning of the month. What were the scenes like today?
Leigh-Ann, the scenes were quite heartbreaking. It's the first time we've seen the family. We've seen Sharon Osbourne, his children, Kelly, Jack and Amy, come out for the first time since Ozzy died last week. And Sharon Osbourne, usually she's very much this very jovial character, but we could clearly see how grief-stricken she has been left by Ozzy's death. They were married for over 40 years. And I think she found it quite overwhelming seeing the amount of love that there has been for Ozzy Osbourne in his hometown, as you said, in Birmingham, and also the children, Kelly, Jack and Amy. This is a family who have lived their life in front of the cameras when we think of back to their reality TV show, The Osbournes. So even in death, this has been captured worldwide for people to see how much they've been upset and had left bereft by Ozzy's death. This was clearly unexpected. He had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2019, but I interviewed Kelly Osbourne a few weeks ago, and they were very much looking forward to Ozzy winding down after that infamous Black Sabbath gig only a few weeks ago. So I think his death has not only shocked the family, but shocked the thousands of fans that we've seen today who have lined the streets of Birmingham.
Yes, indeed. And at that Black Sabbath gig, his voice was still absolutely amazing, I must say. But who were the celebrities that were in attendance today? We obviously know that Sharon was there along with the children, but who else came to say goodbye?
So they had this public procession, but afterwards there was going to be a private funeral for Ozzy where the likes of Sir Elton John, Metallica, some of the younger artists he's inspired, including Youngblood, was set to be in attendance. In Sir Elton John's tribute, he called Ozzy the Pantheon, a pantheon of rock gods. And they had such a very close friendship over the past 40 years because they both rocketed to fame at around the same time. While they were from different music genres over the past few decades, they've been very close as friends. So I can imagine he definitely had a star-studded turnout because this is the man who has influenced so many music styles, both old and new.
But also, Stephanie, his personality just shone through, didn't it? We saw that on the reality TV programme, The Osbournes. Everyone loved it. He was such a great figure, so full of life. So what will Ozzy's legacy for both music and reality TV be? Because I don't ever think I missed one show, you know, when it came to The Osbournes. The world was hooked.
Well, what I loved about Ozzy Osbourne, and I think a lot of fans loved about him, is what you saw is what you got. I think there's a lot of stars these days where they're not as transparent with their families, or not with their families, but with their fans. They almost have a media persona. But anyone who watched Ozzy or met Ozzy in real life, they'll know this is a man who was a realist. This wasn't a man who shied away from controversy. He made lots of mistakes, but he also owned up to it. And I think, you know, the reason why Birmingham is devastated is because truly he was a son of Birmingham. He came from a very impoverished background to becoming one of the world's famous heavy metal superstars. And also he was one of the few who led the way for reality TV. So I do think he was a once in a lifetime artist, but also once in a lifetime man who could make us laugh and also be shocked in horror.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of shock horror when it came to the Osbournes, but he was such a wonderful character. Showbiz reporter Stephanie Tetchy, thank you so much. A reminder of our top stories. Tsunami fears remain across the Pacific after a Russian earthquake as waves hit the west coast of the United States. Netanyahu blasts the UK for planning to recognise a Palestinian state if Israel don't take steps to end the war in Gaza. And family and fans of Ozzy Osbourne line the streets of Birmingham as his coffin passes through the city centre for a final farewell. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusafora. It's coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in just a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.